This podcast series is presented by Statewide Learning Services, a division of the Office of Management and Enterprise Services.
The other thing that I think is really important, and I told my senior staff to do this, is we need to, right now, I'm working 7 days a week, and that's fine because it's a crisis and I need to be. And a lot of my people are too. But what you see when people do that long term is mistakes, detrimental mistakes. And you can't get mad at someone who's been working 90 days straight if they do something that the consequence is X because they've been working that. It's a sad situation, but you don't want it to get to that point. And so it's getting with my leadership team and saying, I need you to identify these people on your team. I need you to schedule days off for them and make sure staffing is adequate on the days they're going to have off. That way, they can take time off and not feel like it's going to fall apart. They can have something to look forward to. I had the choice recently of, are we going to work on July 3rd or not? Because it's a state holiday. And I really struggled with it. I really did. But I ultimately decided that we are going to give them the day off because I know we could serve a lot of people that day. Our business is so dependent upon banks being open and things of that nature that I feel like we could get a lot done, but it's not going to have the effect until Monday anyway. And the benefit of people having that day off, I think, will outweigh whatever we could get done in the day. And it may not be a popular choice, and I get that. And that's the other part of it, is sometimes you're going to have to make choices that in the moment are not very popular and you'll have to defend. But you just got to know that, like, you use the information that you had at hand. And the information I have says, if I push my staff and say, no, you don't get that state holiday, I think the repercussions down the road are going to be detrimental for claimants. I think, and that will be, detrimental on a wide scale as opposed to being able to serve 150, 200 people in that day. So those are kind of the things that come to mind when I hear you say that, because it's never I have all these choices and all of them are good. It's always probably worst and worse, and making sure that you value that human toll and their emotional stability as much as you do the product. That's always a shifting responsibility for sure.
I think that's fantastic.
Well,
that's fantastic. I agree with the decision to go ahead and take the time off, simply because the outcome that you would get on the other side far outweighs, like you said, this one and a more immediate win. With your title as interim director, how do you think the interim impacts the connection that you're able to make with your staff?
To be perfectly honest, I hadn't even thought about that. I think that interim motivates me. I'd like to be in this position permanently, but I also know that there's certain objectives that need to be made, and we need to be in a different place as an agency in order for our board and the administration to feel like, yep, she's the right leader. And I think they're right in thinking that. Absolutely. We've made big changes. We processed more PUA claims in one day than the agency did in all of April and May. Like, that is the reality, is that we really are doing great work. But is that holistically the answer to all of our problems? No, because the agency needs a leader that is going to say, I know where you are now. I know where we want to be. Here's the path of getting there. And here's where you fit into it. And I think me being interim right now, it probably affects them in that they've had different leadership. In the past year, they've had I'm the third director. And I think that probably gives them a little bit of trepidation to buy into my plan. And that's totally reasonable. I get it. Mm-hmm. I've been in positions where leadership has changed multiple times in a short amount of time, and you get a bit of whiplash, and you're like, well, is this person going to stay? Do they even understand us? That kind of response is normal, and I don't fault them for it. It just makes me want to work harder and show them, stick with me. We're going to get there. And I keep saying that over and over. We're going to get there. Mm-hmm. We will. And it's probably sooner than we think, because we're going to see the fruits of our labor. And I try to tell them and send them the good stuff so that they see that we are working towards this and people are noticing. But I think there's a what's the word I'm looking for? There's an anxiousness that is there. And if I try to fight it, I'm not going to accomplish that. They have a right to feel anxious. They have a right to feel like that it's a tumultuous situation. And it's my job to make sure they understand that, like, my objectives with the agency include them and make their job and our claimants' lives better.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. I hear so much about acknowledging, accepting, and welcoming the human experience, the emotion that comes along with it, and how much of a difference that makes in developing one of the most important pieces of a leadership and subordinate relationship, which is trust. And so I think that that's a lot of I hear a lot from you that is, to me, would be beneficial in being able to develop that trust for your staff, which is going to be so important helping them move forward, because you mentioned that you have so many people who have been doing this job for so many years. Change is difficult for a lot of people, not for you, which I think is fantastic, and definitely agree that it's made such a difference in you being able to tackle this head on. But definitely helping people to manage the change that is coming and trust that. What would you say to your employees, to other leaders, just about change management and the priority outside of just what you're trying to change, but also factoring in that change management piece to making sure that people come out on the other side okay? What are some of your tips for tricks for that?
I think that change management is something that I don't know if there's a rule book for it that like you can holistically say, if you do these 5 steps, it'll be okay. I'm sure there's some different avenues that are preferred over others, but I think setting expectations is absolutely necessary. But also giving yourself the flexibility to say, well, that fits within what I thought would happen, but learning this information, I'm going to do X instead of Y, right? And then effectively communicating that. I think in my particular situation, there's this idea that I've been trying to dispel that, well, if we just get past this, it'll be back to normal. I've tried to say many, many times that that's never going to happen again. Like, we are never going to go back to being able to adjudicate claims manually primarily. That's just never going to happen, because the people that need our help are not going away in August. They're not going away in December. They're not there. It will be probably not as quite the crisis it is right now, but we will have an elevated need and an elevated requirement of our agency for at least a year. I mean, that is absolutely something that I say every single day, because I think that if people are expecting, if I just get over this hurdle, it's going to be okay. But honestly, it's not that there's a hurdle. It's that the track's been elevated and we're never going back to, sea level anymore. It's always going to be this elevated need. And here's how I'm going to help you with that. We're hiring 50 new people. We are, making these changes. These are the things that will help you, so that whenever I tell you that, it's not like, oh, I don't think I can do this. Yes, we can. We will have a way to do it. It's going to be okay, but I don't want to set the expectation that somehow the process that we had in 1990 is going to be adequate for 2020 in the landscape we're looking at. It's just not the same world at all. And a crisis gives you that perspective, but at the same time, crisis implies that somehow it's going to, post-crisis. That will happen, but it's never going to be post-crisis back to January of 2020. It's going to be post-crisis with a different claimant pool. It's going to be post-crisis with a different need. It's going to be attacking these problems and dealing with partnerships that we probably haven't had to yet. And how do we do this effectively? And I'm confident we can do it. But I think that that's really scary for people, because they're like, well, we're going to be serving 500, 600,000 claims. And I don't know, but we're definitely not going to be doing 20,000. I mean, to give you scale, February of 2020, the agency paid out $23 million the whole month. The agency paid out $232 million in 1 week last week. I mean, this is the scale we're talking about. Will it always be over 200 million in 1 week? Probably not. I mean, I don't think that is going to be our reality, but I do think that we probably will not go back to 23 million, maybe ever. It's just going to be a different world. And the workforce piece of that's going to be really important too. And I think that there is a plan for people. That's the other piece of it too. People in the agency and outside of the agency. There's training available. There's different tools. It's not like we're just good luck in the new post-COVID world. We have a strategy. We have a plan, but also letting them know that that job or that function within the agency is not going to look the same this time next year. And I think that message, while not always comforting, is important, because you don't want to set unrealistic expectations for people, and they're shooting for a goal that isn't really ever going to materialize.
Right. You made a very valid point. I think we talk a lot about unemployment as it relates to OESC, but there are a lot of employment services that the agency provides as well. And so can you talk a little bit about what some of the future looks like for that, some of the ideas or plans that you have moving forward for helping Oklahomans get back to work?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to be careful and not take the thunder away from the workforce arm of our operation, because there's definitely Oklahoma Works is an agency that does all of this really well that we partner with. And I think that partnership's super important, because people being on unemployment for a long period of time, some people handle it well, some people don't, but it can become a new normal in a situation. And we do want to see people returning to either their former jobs or finding a new career and getting training so that they can be successful there. That's really important. For the first time last week, we reported a decrease. First time since I've been interim director, we reported a decrease in new claims. I think it was like 50,000. It was down 50,000, which tells me that not as many people are becoming newly unemployed. But what we did see is the continuous claim number is continuing to go up. It's continuing. So there's people, we're adding to the pool, but people are not moving off of it at the rate where we would see a decrease. So that's an important statistic, but it's also important in showing that either the jobs that people did are not there anymore. And that's the reality. There are probably 10%, maybe even 15% of these jobs may not even return. And that's, again, the new reality. And figuring out what skills do these people have? What do they like to do? What do they want to do? Where are the opportunities for them for training? And how do we make that easily accessible? We work with ODVA and Veterans Affairs to see if the military is a path for some people. There's definitely people that have had success there. Retraining for the oil and gas industry, as far as technical skills. That's another area that we're partnering with people on. There's quite a few different training opportunities, but also workforce opportunities that will say, hey, we've got, it's not necessarily a one-on-one. We've got a group of people that have this skill set. What does that job look like in 6 months right now? Where can we find jobs for people that they feel like the whole world now has changed and they don't have a place in it? Because that is something I don't know if we've ever had to deal with. I think we've had to do it on a micro level, right? As technology changes and people's needs, probably. There's things that we used to do in the 80s that's no longer a job. But that being said, it's a whole different ballgame now because it's happened immediately. There's a lot of people that are unemployed that find value in being employed that we need to help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For people on the front line, how are their voices heard with you? What avenues are available so that if I'm a frontline employee, or if I'm one of the new 50 people that are coming in, that I feel like that I can be heard? I often find that the best decisions about how to make a difference in a specifically with OESC or with an agency are the people who are on the front lines. They have the best ideas. They know the work. They've been doing it. They see the problems and can offer a lot of good advice and suggestions. How are you making sure that their voice is heard, or that you're getting that information from them so that their experiences can make a difference in moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that I would be a fool if I told you, oh, I'm really good at that. I mean, I think that you can always improve in that area because, again, we're talking about limited time and resources, right? And making time to say, well, I think I'm going to make this decision, but I want to talk to someone that's going to disagree with me. Mm-hmm. It is one of those things that it's a learning curve, obviously. I know you're not going to have the same opinion I am, but I think that whatever you're going to say will probably ultimately help me be successful. And I think making decisions even with contradictory information is something that I have definitely learned as I've gotten older. I think with frontline employees, them being able to see you is important. Sometimes that's not possible. I mean, especially in a pandemic, either if it's, I talked about going down to Concourse Theater and checking in with people and making sure. I think the fact that they know that I know they're down there and this is happening probably makes a big difference. That doesn't make me an amazing leader, but recognizing that small effort of saying, hey, how's it going? What's going on? How many people? Making sure they know that I'm there and that I can help if need be. I think whether I'm necessary or not. Is it necessary? Probably not. Is it something something that I think helps? Absolutely, because I'm caring about their well-being. They know that someone's making decisions having seen what they're going through, and getting that feedback is really important to me. I think especially in a crisis, leadership is a participatory sport, right? And I've tried to make that be one of my hallmarks of being accessible to people in my agency, but also through doing interviews with the media and giving updates and things of that nature, because I think transparency kind of goes hand in hand with listening to frontline employees and all of the things that give people the feeling that you know what's going on at each level of this process. You know there are people that still need help. You know that there is a situation that, while not ideal, is being managed. Having that accessibility, that transparency, that there's that old idea of an executive that kind of sits up in their office and has no idea what's going on, or isn't communicating directly with people, or that happens actually more often than I think I expected it to, because when I go down and talk to the claimants and the Concourse Theater, well, I didn't think you would come down here. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I'm just a person. Like, I probably have more in common with you than I do all of the people at the Capitol, you know? And so that piece of it doesn't make me special, but I think that seeing that and making sure people know that I am not someone who signs checks and doesn't recognize you sitting in this chair waiting on services from my agency is really important to the frontline employees, the claimants, but just all the way around, because you don't ever, I don't want to ever comment on a situation that I don't know about firsthand and then inadvertently cause a reaction or a situation to bloom up because I didn't take the 5 minutes to go see what's going on.
Absolutely. What I would say in watching some of the interviews that you've done on the news, one of the things that I appreciate is the transparency. I don't see a lot of talking around a thing or hiding behind or trying to save face. It's the reality. And I genuinely feel like that's such a great example. And it's great leadership, not just for the individuals who you're here to serve, the citizens of Oklahoma, but your staff, because they know what's going on. Yeah. And they know if what you're presenting out is not accurate or not transparent. And so I do think that lends credibility to trust and saying, okay, she hears us and she gets it and she's not afraid to actually speak on it. Because if you're afraid to speak on it, you really won't be doing anything to fix it either. So I think that's fantastic. I love that.
That cognitive dissonance, I think, is really detrimental to an organization. I'm glad that you said that, because I think that when you have a leadership that's saying, okay, this is our forward face. And, you know, sometimes things that I'm not saying that is never happening, but with this issue in particular, I've tried to be really transparent in that, yes, we do have numbers, and be transparent and say, I am not 100% sure that the metrics that I have right now are what is true current state. And, you know, that's okay, because I've only been the leader for 1 week, 2 weeks. And when we do give information, I'm really quick. Yes, I can count on these, but it took me a little while to get this for you because I wanted to make sure it was 100% right. Mm-hmm. Because there is that cognitive dissonance where if I say, oh, there's only X amount of people that, you know, are waiting, but my staff knows that they're getting 10,000 calls every 2 weeks, you know, that is the piece of it that's like gives that air of, well, we're only going to tell half the story. And also being new to leadership. I mean, the people, and I know some of the people, I knew some of the people that, you know, are in the agency beforehand, you know, just casually, but they don't know me. And I think that impression of how they see me handle, you know, those tough conversations makes it easier for them to handle those tough conversations, because it's all tough right now. There's no one is standing on the winners platform right now and saying we won, you know, and absolutely we want to be able to, but again, it goes back to that there's no end of the race right now. The race is just going to keep going. It's how we manage it going forward that's really going to determine what our next current state is.
Absolutely. You said two things, cognitive dissonance and tough conversations. And those things go hand in hand for me. When we're looking at crises, when we're looking at social unrest that we're experiencing right now, talking about inclusion and diversity in a work environment, in a state agency, talk to me about those two things. I feel like cognitive dissonance is something that we want to better understand as a people, and maybe get out to your training or to your staff, talking about biases and these different types of things. So talk to me about what that looks like for you in developing your staff in inclusion and diversity, overcoming bias, and having the tough conversations that we avoid because of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that it's interesting. Like, I think as leaders have this idea that they should have like all the answers. Like, I know that you're asking me that question. I know all the answers and I've done this right. Therefore, you can follow me as I lead.
Right.
Right. And I tried to be, and I don't know if that I've always been confident enough to say I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't think that anyone, at whatever age is, you develop it as you get older. But I think learning the lesson to say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that, but I can learn it. Or, you're right. I think I did make a mistake. And I appreciate you telling me about that, because I think people, when they do stand up and say, hey, the way you said that really did not make me feel good, or you may not realize this, but when you say this about me, Tanisha, that makes me feel X, Y, and Z. And I don't think that's what you meant, but I probably am not the only person that feels that way. And I think taking that feedback, because that's what it is. It's feedback. It's not criticism. Necessarily, unless you continue to do it, and then it absolutely is. But like taking that and saying, I can probably do better. You're not always going to. Feelings are something that there's not like a calibration meter that you can say, all right, I'm hitting 100%. I've made 100% of the people feel 100% good 100% of the time. That's just not possible. But if I'm doing something that is disenfranchising you, or if I'm doing something that I'm saying something, specifically saying something that is in some way excluding you or just making you feel bad, being able to take that and not get defensive about it, I think is the piece of it that really takes, everyone does it. You have to take a step back, because I know that I can be defensive just like everybody else, but you have to take a step back and say, okay, what was the point of, am I really communicating what I want to communicate if it made her feel that way? And if the answer is no, then how can I do better? Because I think at the core of it, I don't ever want to, say something that is A, racist, or B, biased, or exclusionary, or anything like that. But am I perfect at it? Probably not. And I think just approaching it where you say, I can get better at this, and what you're telling me just helps me get better, can be difficult, especially when we've got everything going on. Absolutely. Meeting people where they are. The way that you say something and the way that I say something may not be the same, but the meaning, and we have to recognize that the meaning behind those words can be completely different. Mm-hmm. And that's okay, right? I didn't mean that. Okay, that's fair, but it still doesn't mean that just because you didn't mean it doesn't mean that it's okay. Right. And that is one of those things that I think is there's no metrics, there's no data, it's just making sure that when you approach someone, intent does matter, but it's not the whole picture, and it's never going to be the whole picture. And I think giving people grace and being able to have those tough conversations and say, you know what, you're totally right. That was not my best moment, and thank you for helping me learn to be better, is where I like to approach it. Is it always possible? Sometimes not. That's in a perfect scenario, but doing that the majority of the time, I think we would have a lot. I think people can get further down the road than Absolutely. Sitting here saying, well, I don't understand your experience, or that's not what I meant. We're just going to always be stagnant in this place of not, misunderstanding.
Absolutely. I like to look at it as thinking through not just your intentions, but also the impact, mm-hmm. and thinking about that holistically before moving forward, so that you can recognize if it's going to look a little different coming from someone else's lens. So thank you for what you said earlier, as far as there not being a step-by-step to this leadership thing. You alluded to not having all the answers, or not necessarily being the standard. And I think that that's so real and so necessary. And so here at our podcast, at A Seat at the Table, we want to make sure that we're not presenting it to say that you're going to be the perfect leader, but that imperfections are still welcome, that you are still able to be effective even in your mistakes, even in the things that you don't do well. But that we also have room to grow and learn, which is why we're so grateful and so thankful for you coming here and being willing to speak to us, speak on your experience, speak to our audience, and hopefully the others can learn from your path and move forward from there. Do you have any closing comments? Anything else that you'd like to add or say, just kind of from Shelley?
That's always a tough one. When I do interviews, I always get asked, is there anything else you want to tell them? And sometimes I have something in mind, definitely. And the other times I'm like, I'm sure there is. What is it? I think that leadership, like you were saying, I mean, I am not a perfect leader. I think like starting right there is probably a good place to start. I'm responsible for what I do, absolutely. But I don't think that what I'm doing is necessarily a blueprint for someone else. But that being said, and as well, there's always going to be someone smarter than me in the room. There's always going to be someone that probably has more experience than me in the room. But there's really only one me. And I think that that's where the, competitive edge or the soft skills that we're talking about right now, I think that's where that comes in with leadership, because, I can be the perfect person on paperwork and not navigate a crisis very well. And I think that there's definitely a place for making sure that all of that, you're great on paper, but you're also filling in those gaps with empathy, compassion, planning, all of these things that are super important in leadership, but also don't get their due at times. Mm-hmm. And hopefully when we do this again in a year, we'll look back on it and I'll say, oh, here's all the lessons that I learned, because I think that's the important piece, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, do as best as you can until you can do better. I think that's Maya Angelou. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's always been one of those things that has always struck me, is that if you go in and you give 110% every single day, and you can walk away from your office or your cubicle or even your couch if you're teleworking and say, man, I earned my paycheck, I did the best I could, and then turning around and doing it again the next day. I mean, that's good leadership. That's the basis of good leadership. And when we talk again, I hope to be able to say I did that every single day, and we're in a different place.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Shelley, for being here with us. Great information.
It was a pleasure. This was a lot of fun.
I'm glad.
Thank you for joining us. Today's podcast is sponsored by the Certified Public Manager Program, a nationally accredited, cohort-based leadership program that transforms public service professionals within their management careers. To find out more, visit learn.ok.gov. Music provided courtesy of bensound.com. Until next time, keep on learning.